Hello there, my name's Card. I'm a historical researcher who's recently gotten into video editing, and today I'd like to talk about something that's been on my mind a little while. Which US president would win in a fight? It's a simple enough question on the face of it, and one that people have spent hours passionately arguing over long before me. But just because it's already well-trodden ground doesn't mean I can't weigh in myself. And before I even start laying down the parameters of what all US presidents fight means, I'll say that if your first instinct was to answer either Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt, or Abe Lincoln, not only are you flat wrong, I think you've picked up one of the most uncritically thinking and pop culture-minded views of history possible. And in a minute, I'll tell you why. And as a bonus, I'll also tell you who the real correct answer is too. Now, just so we're all on the same page here, or in case you happen to be unfamiliar with what a hypothetical matchup like this is commonly intuited to look like, what I mean here is, if every US president, from George Washington to the at time of recording incumbent, Joe Biden, fought all or any other US presidents hand to the point of fatality or physical incapacitation, which POTUS would be most consistently expected to win? That's 45 individuals in total, Grover Cleveland being counted only once, assumed to be fighting one-on-one with one another in a neutral environment, unarmed, and all else being equal. And for the purpose of this exercise, each president is physically as they were historically during their time in office. That doesn't strictly mean each combatant on their first or last day of their respective presidencies, but treat it as a sort of amalgam of their physical attributes, experience, and capabilities during their term. Now, I feel everyone should be clear on what we mean. Like I alluded to a minute ago, whenever I see this topic come up anywhere, and especially when it comes up online, I see people jump in as quick as they can to hype up three presidents in particular, Jackson, Lincoln, and TR. And I think anyone doing that has completely missed the point of even having this discussion. A topic like this is supposed to be a chance to make use of your own knowledge and enjoy considering the merits of all possible options. It's an opportunity to get to bring up some of the more obscure presidents and take a look at who they were and have a little fun discussion by actually considering the question. But what I've seen people do more and more with this sort of prompt is just jump right to an answer they've heard before, as if there's only one single objectively correct response, and they just need to prove how clever they are. You get these types of people in internet forums by the barrelful. I guarantee if the which president would win in a fight question ever comes up on just about any discussion page, you'll get people falling over themselves just to recite one of the pre-approved acceptable answers, all for the sake of some perceived online clout, or perhaps out of a sense of smug know-it-allism. In this particular case, the so-called correct answers are also born out of a drastically oversimplified view of history to boot, wherein these notable people from the past are simplified down to a handful of embellished stories and some easily recountable attributes. The modern love of Teddy Roosevelt stems from his pop culture framing as some paragon of virile fitness and early 20th century masculinity, primarily just because he liked to go hunting on his days off, and he once made up a fake Native American proverb about carrying a big stick. In reality, he was of average height and build, nearsighted in one eye, blind in the other, and was chronically asthmatic from birth right up until his death from persistent cough at age 60. Similarly, the people barracking for Jackson and Lincoln tend to cite one of the few things about either's life they've been told. According to them, Andrew Jackson was some sort of military genius, on account of the fact he could keep US casualties minimal while burning down peaceful Native American villages during the War of 1812, and that he once started beating a vagrant with his cane on the steps of the Capitol building until his companions made him stop. But that doesn't make him a fighter, he's just a crotchety old man. With Lincoln, people do have a bit more of a case to argue in his favour here. He was noticeably above average height, and had been an amateur wrestler growing up on the Kentucky frontier. But that doesn't change the fact that by the time of his presidency, Lincoln was just as noticeably underweight, and the vigor of his youth had been very thoroughly ground down by 2 cases of malaria, at least one brush with smallpox, and a lifetime of taking mercury pills to treat a persistent bowel obstruction. The fact of the matter is, you don't need to go all that far back into the history of even the most developed nations to reach a point where most people were being driven very quickly into the grave by just about everything around them. The food gave you gout, the water gave you dysentery, and for all the drugs you could buy over the counter, none of them were antibiotics. You were just happy not to have died in a gory industrial accident at your childhood factory. These presidents may each have been effective administrators, and some of the most influential men on the whole of the earth in their day, but there's absolutely no need or cause to mythologize their physical standing. Even under the best historical circumstances, the POTUS is just an old man who won a big vote after a lifetime of work behind a desk. And throughout the 20th and now 21st century, America has only trended further and further towards electing older and older men with increasingly desk-centric resumes. The lesson here is twofold. One, don't fool yourself into thinking your civic bureaucrats are anything special physically. And two, don't go repeating the talking points that uncritically suggest they were just because the chance came up. In fact, bookmark this very video, and next time you see someone online do so, send them the link. I'm sure they'll take it well. Now, with all of that necessary reflection on the topic said and out of the way, let's actually visit the question itself. And I'll tell you who my money's on. I think the easiest way of doing this sort of thing is essentially to pull up a chart of all 45 men and start by judiciously crossing off the obvious wrong answers.
I've already mentioned why I wouldn't back Jackson, Lincoln, or TR, so count them out. A few other obvious eliminations. The other Roosevelt, FDR, wheelchair-bound with polio. JFK, young, and you'd think fit, but actually one of the most chronically unwell US presidents, even before he lost most of his skull and all its contents in his presidency's final moments. William Henry Harrison, famously frail, died of a cold less than a month into his term in office. Joe Biden, far too past his prime. William Howard Taft, massively overweight. Grover Cleveland, Chester A. Arthur, and Bill Clinton, all significantly overweight. Donald Trump is old and overweight. Zachary Taylor, 30 years of military commandership, can't change the fact that by the time he was president, he'd been chain-smoking cigars just as long, gotten massively overweight himself, and was riddled with debilitating sores. Woodrow Wilson and Ronald Reagan were both practically senile by the end of their respective terms in office. James Madison, no reach, by far the shortest US president at 5'4". For that matter, Benjamin Harrison, Martin Van Buren, William McKinley, and both John Adamses are all below average height and don't seem to have any significant advantages or experiences to compensate. Might as well cross them off the list too. At this point, the remainder of the field is a few notable names and a lot of filler. Jefferson, Monroe, Tyler, Polk, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, Hayes, Garfield, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover are all fairly unimposing 19th and early 20th century paper pushers for the most part. Nothing all that out of the ordinary that you'd expect would give any of them a meaningful edge or handicap here. Obama, Bush Jr., and Jimmy Carter are the modern bureaucrats. A bit younger and fitter on average than most of their peers on the presidential roll, but none of them are exactly known for having a fighter's build either. Lyndon Johnson and Bush Sr. are both a bit tougher. and both were tall in their prime. But they're also both pushing it, age-wise, by the time they were president, and neither necessarily has anything to suggest they could take the top spot in a hand-to-hand contest. Eisenhower, an excellent president with a lot of experience, unfortunately also getting on in years, and not from an era where martial prowess could be perfectly equated with raw physicality. So that brings me to my top 5. 5th place, Harry S. Truman. Relatively young and lean, some military service, but again, not a readily hand-to-hand guy. He's country tough and more than ready to have the buck stop with him, but he's not particularly tall or muscularly built either, and his habit of having had a sipping whiskey on hand from literally the first second of his presidency to the last is definitely going to slow him down some here. 4th place, George Washington. He's at least 6 foot tall, solid, and has a history of frontline fighting experience. He'd make a good argument for being the outright winner if he didn't have a number of mobility issues in his old age and atrocious eyesight. Still, it's worth noting that he was another big fan of medicinal mercury and complained regularly of constant pain in his limbs. And let's just say there's a reason that he died in 1799, when most of the other founding fathers lasted at least another decade or two. 3rd place, Richard Nixon. Perhaps a surprise that he made it this far up the list, but I feel he's actually a solid choice. Relatively young, fairly tall too, and definitely a real go-getter, which counts for a lot. He had the sort of frugal Quaker upbringing that meant he was consistently one of the fittest US presidents ever to hold office, and would only very rarely get so blackout drunk while on duty that Henry Kissinger would need to hang on to the nuclear launch codes for a bit. Had he have won the election of 1960 and gone straight into the presidency after serving as VP under Eisenhower for 8 years, he'd easily be my pick here. But unfortunately, he ended up being made to wait until 1969 to take office, which does reduce his edge a little bit. Further still, just as intangible factors, like the Nixonian drive to succeed, do have to be taken into account, so too does the unavoidable fact that fate just doesn't like some people have to be reckoned with. So I can definitely see Nixon placing in the top 3 through sheer application of will, but I feel he'd lose out on a position in the final itself. 2nd place, Ulysses S. Grant. I think Grant is a really strong contender here, and I'm sure quite a few others watching might have been thinking that too. He's a veteran of a lot of active combat in the Civil War and earlier, stout, headstrong, and keen. He's got a lot going for him. Unfortunately, you can also read off a long list of things that would be weighing him down here. He was another heavy smoker and even heavier drinker. Body was just decaying upright by the time he left office. Liver, kidneys, lungs, eyes, and stomach all failing, covered in lesions, terminal throat cancer. Grant's cavalier nature happened to make him successful on the battlefield, but he is also notoriously reckless and prone to rash decisions, so much so that he even alienated his own party from nominating him to a 3rd election he would have easily won. His experience and general soldier's disposition could carry him much further than most presidents, without a doubt. But between his poor health, his below-average height, his disregard for thinking things through fully, and the infirmity of age, I just can't see him consistently coming out on the very top. 1st place, by my reckoning, Gerald Ford. Maybe not the obvious choice in everyone's mind, but I think he's a very solid choice. Among the relatively younger POTUSes, was still in tip-top condition in office, 6 foot and very well built. Might not have had any direct combat experience like Washington or Grant, but would still be a beast in any physical matchup. Even as a teenager, Ford had excelled in his twin interests in sports and scouting. By 18 years old, he was playing as star center, linebacker, and long snapper for the University of Michigan football team, leading them to the national championships undefeated twice and being named MVP. He turned down offers to go pro to instead join the US Naval Reserve, where he became a swimming, running, boxing, wrestling, and drill instructor. In his comparatively short time in office, he might have been known for falling down on camera more than once, but he picked himself back up just as many times, and, true to form, blithely shrugged off 2 separate attempts made on his life within 17 days of one another. And by the time he passed away in late 2006, was the longest living ex-president. Gerald Ford has to be, by far, one of the fittest, fastest, and most physically resilient US presidents to ever hold the office. And I think his potential is enormously overlooked in this sort of hypothetical scenario all the time. But that's just my 2 cents on the question. I know this is a much more indulgent video than I usually try to write, especially in the second half, but I still hope you got something beneficial out of it. And if not, you should go relitigate the entire debate in the comment section. With that said, once again, my name's Card. This has been Card Posting. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to. Bye for now, and have a lovely day.
I'm Gerald Ford, and you're not.